Greetings, traveler. Since the very first episode of Easy Mode, I've been having questions about what exactly D&D is, or in other words, Dungeons and Dragons. In that episode, we spoke about it in the context of game design and how it can help you improve the way you design games. But today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons itself, what it is, what its main components are, and how it is relevant to you. If you don't know who I am, my name is Santos. I've been working in the games industry for the last 13 years or so, and this podcast is my way of sharing everything I've learned. So if you're walking the path of making video games, then this one is for you. So let's get started. What is Dungeons and Dragons exactly? What is the point of this game? Well, it would be easy to understand it if we put it in the context of, let's say, Lord of the Rings. There you have a group of adventurers who go on to achieve this grand task. Dungeons and Dragons, in its essence, tries to model that process in a very simple and approachable way, while at the same time keeping it as customizable as possible. So just like you have Frodo and Aragorn and Legolas all trying to destroy the ring in Lord of the Rings, in a typical Dungeons and Dragons adventure, you might have three friends trying to save a princess, slay a dragon, save a village, maybe all of the above combined, while at the same time giving you all the tools you need to create yourself as one of these characters and roleplay as them. So you could be an elf, a dwarf, a wizard, a warrior, it's up to you. So why are we talking about Dungeons and Dragons and not other similar games? That's a very good point. Dungeons and Dragons is not the only tabletop role-playing game. It's not the only game that you play on a table with some dice and figurines like this one here, if you can see it, or similar ones, or a mat to show you the grid of the game. There's many similar ones. The reason why we're just talking about Dungeons and Dragons is because it's a very popular game in that space. There's been many games, even movies done about it, so it's more easily available than perhaps other examples. But if you have another more easily available example, I think you will find many common points with that one as well. So now that we know what the general gist of D&D is and what you're supposed to do in the adventure, let's have a look at exactly how D&D achieves delivering that grand adventure to everyone, much more with no graphics, with no video game in the tabletop version, with very little props and so on. Well, there's two components to D&D as I see it. One is the storytelling part, where there is one player who acts as the dungeon master, who is essentially the storyteller and the world keeper of the game. And then there is the players, which is typically 2 to 6 players, who act within that world, do things, and then the dungeon master gives them feedback about how their actions affect the world, one action at a time, until eventually they achieve their goal of killing the dragon or whatever it is. So we have these two components to look at, the storytelling and the actions and the combat and the sword fighting and all that. Let's talk about the story first. The story can be anything you can think of. In the beginning, and for most groups starting out, the easiest thing to do is to pick up a book that's for sale that has exactly all the tools you need to present the story to your players and show them maps and read them descriptions for all the locations in the adventure, and it has information on treasure and magic items and exactly what to do, essentially everything you need to, as we say, run the adventure as a dungeon master. And then it's all about how the dungeon master presents the story, sets the setting, and lays out the task that the party has to achieve. Now, the dungeon master is not the only one who sets the story. The players have a very active role in shaping the story themselves, and they do so by their own input into the story. So, for example, the dungeon master might present that the dragon is the objective of the campaign or of the story or of the session, but the players have their own say about how to approach fighting the dragon, how to arm themselves, what tactics to use, whether they want to kill the dragon or capture the dragon or befriend the dragon. All these choices are possible. You might have seen many of these choices in RPG video games, and if you like that sort of flexibility, then I think that the flexibility you have in the Dungeons & Dragons tabletop role-playing version is really going to blow you away. You can do basically anything you can think of, or at least you can attempt to do it, while video games are typically a bit more restricting in that sense. So that concludes what the story is about. Let's talk about the combat and the mechanics and the actions part. Well, this is where having a good reference for that is important. So you might have seen books like this. So something player's handbook. So these books contain all the information the players need to create their character and learn what they're capable of and use their capabilities, all the abilities and weapons and spells and all that inside the story and the game to achieve their goal. So let's take a look inside. Typically, there's a description about how you can create a character and what that character is like, what languages they speak, where they're from, how they see the world, what the typical looks of such people are, and so on. That defines what sort of creature your character is, let's say. Then later on in the book, there is information about the classes. And the classes, something like jobs or professions from other games. So warrior, archer, wizard, all these archetypes are broken down into 12, I believe, classes that you can select here. Now, there's more flexibility than that, but let's keep it simple for now. So there might be charts like this one. So you can have a character that's a druid, for example, and this is all their abilities, and each one of them is explained in the book, so you know what everything does and you have a reference for it at any given time. And then the book continues from that point. So there is information on armor and items and how they work and how they improve your character and so on, to give you some tools and some ways to increase your character's capabilities through the game. The book continues with some additional descriptions for abilities you can pick up as your character levels up and becomes more powerful. And this is also a good way for you to customize your character. And some very common theme that you'll see in Dungeons & Dragons and other similar games is that even though you can have two members of the same class, let's say two warriors or two wizards or two archers, they can be very, very different, not just in looks, but the way they fight. If it's two archers, for example, maybe one focuses on crossbows and the other focuses on bows. If it's two wizards, one does fire magic, another does illusion magic, for example. D&D is very good at providing flexibility in that sense. And the book goes on to explain exactly how combat works. So how do you make attacks, what hit points do, what things you can do in combat, like grappling somebody or pushing them and so on. All these things you see in very dramatic action movies. And finally, in the later part of the book, there is a huge description of spells. And that section is quite long, actually. It's almost half the book. So why is this so big, and isn't it just wizards who can use spells? Actually, in Dungeons & Dragons, because there is so much flexibility, yes, wizards are the main users of spells, but there's also classes like clerics and druids and bards and all sorts of other classes have some sort of access to spells. Maybe not as extensive as wizards, but depending on the class, extensive enough to let them tap into that side of the world. So that gives you a very, very brief example of what D&D is exactly and how it is composed. I showed this player's handbook that is from, I believe, 5th edition. I won't talk too much about editions and so on because I don't think it's so important for the scope of this video. So if you don't know anything about Dungeons and Dragons, then my recommendation would be not to worry so much about finding the right book or finding the right edition. What my recommendation would be is to look around in your community, in your neighborhood or your online communities. There's plenty of Discord channels as well that talk about role-playing and playing D&D online, and try to become a member of a group that plays. So rather than trying to learn all the rules by yourself and finding all the right books and so on, I'd say don't worry about it. Find a group that already plays, and they will say that you're interested in joining. Say that this is your first time even learning about any of these things, and you will definitely find a group that's happy to welcome you. And with that, you will have access to what books and what resources they have. So that also saves you the huge trouble of having to find all these books, maybe purchase them, and so on. And again, don't worry if it's not Dungeons and Dragons game that you're joining at all. There's many other examples. I have here, for example, Numenera player guide, which is from Monte Cook, another legendary tabletop game designer. It talks about creating your own character in a different way, a way that's suited for this particular system's rules. So there's many other cool systems to look at, and there's even systems that are lighter on the story and heavier on the combat and actions and so on. I have here a book from Kingdom Death. So this game doesn't focus so much on storytelling on the player side. In fact, it's designed to be played without a dungeon master. So it's an interesting take on the old TRPG paradigm. But it functions in many similar ways. So it tells you how to move the players, what all the actions do. You also play it with figurines and so on. So it has a lot of commonalities. So I would recommend Dungeons and Dragons, but if you don't have it available, no problem. You can try any variant that you have easy access to. So that's it for today. I'd like to give a shout out to Peter for asking me additional questions about Dungeons and Dragons and trying to understand it and make it more approachable by other people. And if you know someone who is interested in Dungeons and Dragons and finds it intimidating and doesn't know where to start or what it is even, then please share this video with them and let me know in the comments if you have a question or a comment or a suggestion for a future follow-up on this topic. The next video is going to be about being a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons, so how you can create stories and run adventures for a group of Dungeons and Dragons players. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. So thank you for your time and have fun.